Another feature that comes along with template literals or template strings is the ability to tag them. And what that means is that we can essentially run this through a function. And rather than have the browser put in the variables for us, we can have control over how this actual string is made. So I'm going to show you some examples of when that would actually be useful in just a second. But for now, let's look at the mechanics of it and how it all comes together. The way that a tag template works is you simply make a function. I'm going to call this highlight. And you take the name of the function that you want to run against the string and you just put the name right in front of the template. So this is tagging it with a function name. And what's going to happen is that the browser is going to run this function. It's going to provide it with all the information about the string, all the pieces that the person typed, as well as the variables that get passed in. And then whatever we return from this function is what sentence actually is going to be. So it's sort of like a step in between. Before this function actually gets put into here, we have the ability to modify it in any given way. So let's take a look at highlight here. If I just return cool, that is going to take in this entire string and then just return the word cool. So now we see cool being console logged. Obviously, that's not what we want to do, just replace the entire string. But this function will take in the strings and it will take in the actual values. In this case, we're passing name and age. Now, we could do this. It passes in name and it passes in age. But if you don't know exactly how many values someone is being pulled in, there's no way for you to you could say arg1, arg2, and just go through all the way to arg100 just in case there's 100 arguments, but that's no way to live your life. We can use ES6 rest operator, which is 3 dots. We're going to go into that a lot more in a future video, but just know for now, if we do ... values, what it's going to do is it's going to take the rest of the values that are passed to that argument and put them into an array for us. So I'm just going to pop a debugger in here. And what that will do is it's going to stop my function from running. You see it just opened my DevTools here. This shows us a couple things. First of all, the local scope of this function has obviously this, which is a window, it's not important, but it has strings and it has values, strings and values. And what is strings? Strings is an array of 3 things. My dog's name is, and he is years old. What are those? It sort of breaks up the string into the biggest pieces it can until a variable has interrupted it. So we've got my dog's name is, then it pops in a variable, and he is, that's the second item in the strings array, and then years old. So those are the 3 things. Those are the 3 strings that don't get changed. And then the other thing we get is an array of values, which we passed in 2 values here. So we get Snickers and 100. That's what I passed in. I passed in Snickers and 100. Those are the values that get passed in. So this array of strings is always going to be 1 bigger than the actual values array. Even if I were to put in another variable like const gender, male, dog, if I were to just put the gender right at the end of this template string, even though there's nothing after it, watch this. Look, it gives you an empty string at the end and then 3. So again, strings array is always going to be 1 longer than the actual values. And the idea behind this is that we can use this function to build the string ourselves rather than relying on the browser to do it. So I'm going to get rid of our gender variable here and get rid of this variable here and get rid of the debugger. Now we need to create a string. And I'm just going to make an empty string. And I'm using let here. Why? Because we're going to be just tacking things onto this actual string. If I use const, I wouldn't be able to tack onto it. And then we want to loop over this first strings array here, tack on my dog's name is, and then the first value, and he is, and the second value, and then years old, and then the third value. In this case, we don't have a third value. So you can use whatever loop you prefer to do. You could even use a map and then join it together. I'm going to use the .for each. So say strings .for each, and that will take in, we get 2 things here. We get the string and we get the index of the actual element here. And we are going to say string str plus equals. We're going to concatenate on what we have, strings or string plus values, square bracket, index. So that's going to say, give me the first value from the strings, and the first value from our values array and tack them on. Now we're going to hit a little bit of an arrow, but if we return this string that we've been tacking things onto, we should now see my dog's name is Snickers and he is 100 years old, undefined. Okay, so first of all, that's because the strings array is always going to be one larger than the values array. And when we hit that last one, it's only going to be a string and there's going to be no value to tack on the end. So you could check if values of I is undefined. And if it is, then don't put it on. A little trick you can do here is you can use your values of I or just a blank string. And that will just, if there is no values of 3, then it will just return a blank string there. There, that's nice. Now, what can we actually do with this? Well, we could change this so any value that gets passed in gets wrapped in a span, and we can use CSS to highlight it. So you might maybe want to show your user which pieces of the string were variables or which pieces of the string that they passed in. Maybe it's their username or a total for order. In our case, we just want to highlight the name and the actual age. So instead of, I'm just going to duplicate this, I'm going to use template tags instead of concatenation here. And we want to pop in the string, which is going to be the first part. And we want to give ourselves a span with a class of highlight or HL. And inside of that, we'll say values I or nothing. And we can get rid of all this concatenation here. I think that's a little bit nicer. That's our old one. We don't want that. Sayonara. We've got a span. Now let's see what our sentence looks like here. There we go. We got a span with a class of HL wrapped around every single possible one. We got a little bit of a weirdness going on here because that's the end one, but I don't think that will be an issue. Now, if we go into our head here and give ourselves a style tag, our HLs are going to be background yellow. Favorite yellow in the world. Beautiful. We want to pop this actual sentence onto the body. Document.body.inner.html equals sentence. You got my name is Snickers and he is 100 years old being highlighted. You could go ahead and maybe make those content editable so that if a user didn't like it, they could go ahead and change the value they actually wanted. If they didn't like that he's 100 years old, they can change that value as well. It's kind of a fun way to do it. Now, there are much more complicated use cases for that. There's much more in-depth use cases for that. But I think that is the main idea behind these tag templates is that you have a string, you pass in the regular string that you want, and then you get all the pieces, and it's up to you to craft it together and to return some sort of modified data. In our case, we're just wrapping it in a span, but you may want to format it or do some if statement and conditional work on all the values.